Hey everyone, welcome back to Marketing Mondays Mastery. This week we are going to be focusing on how best to prepare for hosting media. So, whether it's an influencer, a journalist, creator, maybe even a tourism office team like Visit NC, or anyone else that has agreed to tell your story. So, as a sneak peek, this is just for y'all. We are planning on a full workshop in the near future that's related to this topic that I'll dive in a little bit deeper. But for today, we're just going to give you some top tips for ensuring a successful visit and one that leads to the coverage that you deserve. And be sure to stick around to the end as we will open up discussion for any hot stories you may have or ones you want to share so that we can get them in front of some of our media contacts. So, Kara and I are back after the holidays. So, we hope everybody had at least a meal with family or a few hours to catch up with loved ones. I am PJ Werchansky. I'm a full time communication director here at Appalachian State University in Boone and part time adjunct and PR manager for Uplift. And then with me is Kara Treadway. She is our marketing expert. She specializes in social media, branding, among a number of other very important marketing related areas. All right, so let's look at today's blueprint. First, we're going to talk about understanding the role of media hosts. What does that mean for you, and how can you make the most of this great opportunity? Then we'll talk a little bit about communication plan, strategic communication, and knowing, how to get those key messages across when you have media visiting your area. Then we're going to dive into preparing for the visit. So that includes lodging and those details, transportation, how to make sure that your visitors are immersing themselves in the experiences, not just telling them about it, and then how to do the meet and greet or meeting the storytellers. We'll talk about making sure that the itinerary that you create is manageable and not overwhelming for your visitors. And then we'll briefly discuss communicating with your partners and how to ensure that you're sharing the most critical information with them prior to your media arriving. And then Kara's going to help us out with brand building, so how to leverage the media visit for brand building. And then we'll share some additional pro tips. And then finally, we'll discuss some follow-up things you can do and just some final thoughts. All right, so understanding the role of media host. So this is a really exciting opportunity. So as the conductor, the facilitator, the liaison, you are the main point of contact for this visit. You'll be the face, the first and last impressions, and you'll help to keep things orchestrated. So I know this might seem daunting, but it's a great way to be able to oversee the efforts from both perspectives of your partners as well as the media. And really, you're going to be shaping this experience for everyone involved. And in this industry, as you know, it's all about relationships. And I can tell you from a conversation that I had at the Visit NC Media Mission, those relationships mean everything. I was visiting with Renee Gannon, who writes for Carolina Country, and the name of a mutual colleague came up in one of our conversations. And she basically said to me that if there is ever a visit or a hosted trip that is being managed by that colleague of ours, she's 100% on board. She said that she knows the details will be covered, the trip's going to go flawlessly, and if anything does come up, she knows that she's in good hands. So just wanted to share that example because it really means a lot. And so you have the opportunity here to set those standards and make a name for yourself as being someone who is really good about covering the details and hosting media. So the pro tip for this piece is to stay calm and confident, communicate clearly and often, and be available to the media and the participants at critical times. All right, so communication plan. So now that you've secured the media, first give yourself a hand because that's an amazing feat in itself. But how are you going to implement a strategic communication plan that utilizes the opportunity to share your story? And then how do we ensure that it's compelling enough for your target audience or target audiences, including the media's reach, to make it worth your efforts? So although this starts well before you reach out to the media initially, there are some things that you can do to help maximize your efforts once they've agreed to come. So think about the most effective channels for reaching your audience and one that incorporates your media's efforts as well, because now you're working as a team, right? And so you want to make sure that you're aligning those audiences. You're utilizing both your and their social media, your blog, maybe theirs, websites, things like that. You also want to highlight the authenticity of your area. So highlight those characters, the locals, the ones that really make the story what it is, and make sure that your partners understand the mutual benefits. Be sure that the storyline that you've agreed upon with the media is clear and concise as possible. You don't want there to be anything ambiguous or any confusing points where they may go in the wrong direction. And then you want to follow through with high quality assets. So if you need to incorporate some professional photography during the visit, that's okay. Or if the influencer, a lot of times they are photographers, or at least they take photos that are enough to be able to share on their social media, and they've done pretty well for themselves. So you can also ask to work out a deal to maybe use some of the photos that they don't use. I worked with a photographer once that was doing an article for us, and when they finished, they sent me a folder of all the photos that they were not going to be using in the article. And we had an opportunity to work with them on getting some much needed photography. And it was minimal effort because everything had already been done during their visit. All right, so now let's dive into preparing for the visit. So one of the most important things, because it's a goal for all of us, is to get people to stay overnight. So let's think about lodging. Where are they staying? Which type of lodging is going to best tell that story? Are you hosting a family, a couple, solo traveler? Will they get that authentic experience where you're going to have them stay? Is one of your town's main characters or some locals involved? Is it centrally located? And so think about that too as far as logistics. Does it make sense for all the activities that they're doing to be staying there? Or is it going to be along the way? Are they having any meals there? Just think about those types of things. And then, one of the more important things too is if you are a DLO or you're in charge of this trip, are you covering the cost? Is the lodging covering the cost? Think through those details because that's really important to have that figured out ahead of time. And then transportation, for our rural partners like yourselves, it's most likely that the media is going to be driving in to cover the story. But again, like we talked about just a minute ago, think about logistics from place to place. Are the roads open? Is there going to be summer construction? Any possible weather-related issues? Is there a certain road that gets flooded every time it rains? And are you in an area where Google Maps or Apple Maps has any issues? And then do you need to lead them around in your vehicle? I know that when I hosted journalists at a property I worked at before, we had a sporting reserve and it was within a private community. And so one, it was really hard to find. Two, they needed access. And so I always made sure that I led them or drove them myself down to that area. And then think about parking too, to make sure that the whole experience from place to place is going to be seamless. And no minor, if it's a minor issue, no big deal, but you want to make sure that you can minimize any of those additional issues like parking. And then see, don't tell. So when arranging the itinerary, it should focus on them seeing and experiencing, not just sitting around listening to somebody talk. So let's say you're going to be at a place for an hour, museum, something like that. It should be about a 10 to 15-minute introduction, and the balance should be about letting them explore on their own, or if it's guided, to kind of make sure things keep moving. You want to make sure that it's interesting and immersive at the same time. If they really want to dive in a little bit deeper, they can linger behind and speak one-on-one with you afterwards. And then meeting the storyteller, so that meet and greet. A big part of the media's role is telling those stories of North Carolinians. So maybe it's the artist who overcame great odds. Maybe it's an award-winning chef that really could go anywhere but decided to live in your town. So these are more important than just meeting all the elected people or the tourism leaders. Unless those folks have something that stands out, make sure that they're meeting all of the characters. And then make the itinerary manageable. The end goal for destinations is to attract overnight visitors. So be sure that everything you show them is relevant to that. Ask yourselves, is this something a traveler from Raleigh, Charlotte, or even DC would be interested in? And if not, it may not be perfect for the media as well. So think about how many activities are on the itinerary. Is there room for the media to maybe linger at a place afterwards if they're really enjoying it? What if the local restaurant is short-staffed or has a large group? Make sure you have bathroom breaks in there, time for coffee, a thunderstorm or anything unexpected, or even if they just need time to work in between. Another just quick example, we hosted a a journalist not too long ago, and one of his biggest feedback points was to limit the face-to-face meetings to maybe 1 or 2 per day. A lot of travel writers prefer to explore independently. They really want to get that authentic visitor experience. So it's understandable that there's local pride, but he said, attractions can speak for themselves and media can always reach back out if they're really interested in something. All right, so now that you've got some of those main details figured out, and now it's time to communicate with the partners or the local folks that are going to be involved. So think about what absolutely needs to be communicated without overwhelming your partners. And it can be tricky because you really want to just share that necessary information. For example, the Jess that was just here really wanted to fly under the radar. And so originally our hosts were planning on kind of being there along the way for every step. But once they heard what he was looking for, they honored the media's wishes, with the exception of one other group who did tend to show up a little bit more, and he really felt like he missed out on a few things. So it's just something to be able to share with y'all. Sharing that completed itinerary a few weeks out is great, and make sure that when you do share that, it's got links, main contact information, dates, times. And if anything is confirmed, like overnight lodging or a dinner reservation, that's noted in there so that people know to make sure to help the media stay on schedule there. All right, so for this one, I am going to pass it off to Kara, our brand expert, to talk a little bit about leveraging the visit for branding.
Perfect. Thanks, PJ. So let's talk a little bit about how we can turn a media visit into something bigger than just a weekend itinerary. So this is where branding really comes in, and where you're starting to build long-term value from a short-term opportunity. So first, we don't want to wait until the day of the visit to create the content. So start with an early countdown or a teaser post to really get that excitement going. And then during the visit, be sure to engage in real time. So share behind the scenes moments or stories that let your audience feel like they're really a part of it. And then don't let it drop off after the visitor leaves. Use the content and the coverage that you've collected to really keep the story alive. And then second here, we want to be intentional. So think about your destination's brand pillars. So is this visit reinforcing your most important narratives? Does it align with what you want people to associate with your town or region? And then third, don't just let the media do their things. We want to collaborate with them. So find ways to support their content creation, while also getting the assets that work for your brand as well. So can they do a short interview for your blog? Can you collaborate on a post or a story together? And then fourth, gather content during the visit. So this is a chance to really fill your content library with authentic, organic assets. So get permissions where needed, and then keep these visuals to reuse for months to come as well. And then finally, think of the media visit as the beginning, not the end. So we want to stay connected with our guests. You can build off of their coverage in future campaigns, or even bring them back to see how your destination evolves. Media relations, like other relationships, really thrive when nurtured. So media visits can give you a return far beyond just the coverage itself. It can really help to define your brand for months or years to come.
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. Such a natural when it comes to all that branding stuff. I'm glad that you covered that one. So thank you. All right, so let's look at some additional pro tips. And again, this just comes back to feedback that we've received. I've been fortunate enough to host a fair number of journalists and media and creators over the last 15, 20 years. Um, and so just some things that I know that I've run into before. First, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, was who is covering the costs? Has this been communicated to the media well in advance? There's nothing more awkward than them showing up and not understanding how that works, or if you've not communicated to them, or even if it's at like me, I was a sales and marketing director, and I wanted to make sure that I went to all of my departments to make sure they knew that we were covering this. So if you have community partners, let them know what's expected of them. And even things like gratuity or tips, who's responsible for that? Sometimes I've had media that say, well, I've got a budget to do gratuity. If you can cover everything else, that's great. And then there's no confusion once they're on property. Next is dietary restrictions or variations. Is your guest a vegan, a vegetarian, low sodium, gluten free, low or no sugar? Do they drink alcohol? Or if they don't, maybe you want to make sure that there's some mocktails or something like that there, especially if you're a restaurant or a hotel. And this one can be a challenge. And I'm going to just self admit that I'm kind of high maintenance. I don't drink, which is fine. I used to, but I don't anymore. And I also try not to consume too much sugar, so my options are limited. Usually, if there's no alcohol, there's water, or if there's mocktails, they have a lot of sugar in them. So just kind of be mindful, and it's okay to ask them what they prefer. So if you need to have that available, I think that's perfectly fine. And then just be sure to communicate these things to anyone involved in the itinerary. It'd be really uncomfortable for both the media and for the property that you represent or the local business to not remember or not know how all that's going to be handled ahead of time. Next, check the weather. And this obviously you can't do anything about, but just being prepared will help you respond if stuff does come up. Is it going to rain every day? Or if there is rain in the forecast, is it going to be a washout? Or is it just going to be for a couple hours in the morning and you can still keep most of the things on the itinerary or maybe flip things around? So, like a lot of places in North Carolina, it's always subject to change, but just including some alternatives. Or even, one of the properties I worked at before, we always had such a challenge with the weekends because if there was rain in the forecast, we would get cancellations. And so one of the things we started doing was really highlighting the benefits of all the things you could do regardless of the weather. So if it's going to be, rainy or warm or cold, it's great to be able to offer some things regardless of what the weather turns out to be, because then there's less concern, less worry about that. Also, limit the take home items. So whether it's gifts or materials, I know that sometimes that can just be a lot to try to bring back with you. I know for me, I'm OCD, so I don't like to have too much stuff anyway. So if people are giving me things, which doesn't usually happen, but if they do, I wouldn't want it to be awkward to say no, thank you, if it's something that's really thoughtful. So, a lot of things can be digital, which is great. And if you do want to include like a local gift basket, you could focus on things that could be consumed during your visit. So it could be like tea or coffee, snacks, beverages. And of course, you want to avoid any breakable items. And then packing list or essentials. It's always good to remind your journalists about certain things like that, especially if it's during the summer. Make sure that they know about water filling stations, if they need sunscreen or hats or anything else that would impact the experience. For me, I have to be mindful of my time spent out in the sun. I don't have any hair, so I always like to either bring a hat with me, or if I'm not expecting a tour to be outside and all of a sudden we're 30 minutes in the sun, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable for me to go stand in the shade or excuse myself to make sure that I'm not getting sunburned. So anyway, always good to just be mindful of maybe some of the special needs of your guests. All right, so when we look at some final thoughts and follow-up, first one being send a note. Yes, we know this one's obvious, but with the amount of time that you spend in coordinating all these details, all the effort, probably some stress, you are likely to feel the pull of everything else that didn't get done while you were hosting. And so when you finally get back to it, you don't want to forget some of the obvious things. So as we know, managing your property, getting back to emails day to day, your family, don't forget to write the thank you note. An email is certainly acceptable, but a handwritten note goes a long way, especially if you can include some specific highlights or something that shows that genuine appreciation for when they were there. And bonus, If you could have a few people from your property or your town sign the note or card, that really means a lot to them as well. And then be sure to provide any follow-up materials, whether it's photos or links or other items that were discussed as something that they needed. Maybe there was something that really resonated with them, and in the initial folder of photos, it's not in there. So you want to make sure that you get back to them with the things that they need. And if you are sharing a document or folder, be sure to grant access because that can be embarrassing too. And they may forget to go back to it if they don't have access to something. And then, as Kara mentioned, you want to track the coverage as to whether there's been shares on social media, or if it is for a written article, it's okay to check in with them from time to time to make sure they have what they need. And then be sure to let them know how to get a hold of you, because usually when they're on a tight deadline, if they do have any fact checking or any other needs, you want to make sure you get back to them right away. And then it's okay to ask for constructive feedback. Usually they're going to offer this anyway, but it's always good to ask for ways to improve, or if they would change anything. It's really imperative to your brand or your business for one that likes to improve, to provide the best, and also take criticism with grace. And then once the story has been published, be sure to promote it across your communication channels. Make sure you tag them, make sure you tell them thank you. And it's okay to send another note, because it might be 6 to 9 month lead time. So maybe they visited you in the fall and it comes out the next summer or fall. And then also evaluate, reflect, analyze, kind of see where that engagement was, see how many impressions you got, or if there's anything else that maybe you would do differently in the future. All right, as we wrap things up, let's look at some key takeaways. Basically, just a recap of what we talked about: understanding your role as a media host. You are the conductor. Stay strategic with everything that you're doing. And if you're serving your town or community, just be mindful of those that are involved and continue to be helpful. Prepare, prepare, prepare. There's so much to do ahead of time, but if you go into the visit being prepared, things are going to go smoothly and you're going to feel a lot better about it as they show up. Communicate with your partners so they know what's expected of them and who's paying for things. Be sure to continue to build your brand and use this as an opportunity to elevate what you're doing. And then offer grace to yourself, to your partners, and the media, because stuff happens, and just do the best you can. And we know that you're going to do an awesome job. All right, so that wraps up today's brief marketing or hosting media 101. Next Monday, we're going to get back to it on the 5th. And then the last Marketing Monday Mastery is going to be the 12th. So we got 2 more webinars left, which we are very excited for y'all to continue to join us. And if there are any other questions, or if you have any stories that you want to share with us, we would love it. You can also email us, Kara, if you want to put your email address in there, and I'll put mine in there too. And then you could send us ideas, stories. We work directly with Visit NC. We also have a number of other media relations that we've been developing over the last 2 to 3 years. And so we are always primed and ready to be able to share your story.